Now let me close everything other than the static details and open up the startup class file for our identity project right here. Here we have to do lots of configuration. First we need to add a connection string and use our application DB context. So we can just go to our API project, copy the connection string from there, close this. Let's go back to our identity, app settings, and we'll paste it right here. We will change the name to Mango Identity Server. Looks good. Let's open up the startup class file inside the product API and copy where we added or configured the DB context and close that startup. We will come back to the startup of identity project and inside the configure services, let me paste that. We are using the same name, so this should work. We will add the using statement, and here make sure you are never adding a reference to other project. We will be adding that in future and I will tell you, but with microservices, your project should be independent. We have the application DB context in the same project, so we will add that. And with the use SQL Server, we will add the Entity Framework Core reference. With this, our DB context is configured. Now, when we are adding Identity Server, we are also using the built-in ASP.NET Identity. So in order to configure that on services, we have the add identity, which expects two parameters. First one is tuser. The user, we are not using identity user, we are using application user. So we will add that with the using statement, and the role, we'll use the default role, which is identity role. We have a comma here, let me remove that. Then on this add identity, we will add the entity framework store, which will be from the application DB context that we have. And finally, we will add the default token providers. These token providers are used when you forget your password. It has to generate some tokens. That is where the token providers are used. And here, this will not be inside the bracket. It will be like this. There we go. So we have added the identity in our project, but we have not added identity server. We have to add that on builder. So we'll say variable builder is equal to, we'll say services.add identity server. On that method, you have to configure options for your identity server. Now there are multiple events that you can generate in Identity Server, like when you want to raise errors, event information, failure, or success. I will be setting all four of them to be true for now. If you want, you can suppress them or hide them. There is also an option to emit static audience claim. We will set that to be true because we're in development right now. Once you have all the options that you want to configure, then you have to add the resources, scopes, and client. We will be using the in-memory API resource, and we have already created them inside the static details. Dot, we have the identity resources. Next, we have the API scope. So dot, we will add the in-memory API scope that we have defined in static detail.api scope. And then we will be adding in-memory clients. We have defined two clients inside static details.client. And this won't be API resources, this will be add in-memory identity resources. With this, we have added identity server, but we want our identity server to use the identity that we added with application user. So for that, identity server provides an add-on which is add ASP.NET identity, and here we have to provide the tuser, which is application user. Now when we are working with identity server, we need some signing credentials. For production, you will store your key somewhere, but for development purposes, we can just use the builder and add developer signing credentials. That will automatically generate a key and add that only for development purposes. So perfect. We did a lot of configuration, but we also have to add the identity server inside the request pipeline. So after the routing, we will be using app.useIdentityServer. That will make sure that identity server gets added to the pipeline. Perfect. So let's save everything that we have done. Let's go to our Solution Explorer and set the startup project to identity. And we need to push migration. We have added few things to our DB context like application user, but in the database, nothing has been created so far. So we'll set this as the startup project, tools, NuGet package manager, console. We'll change the project to identity. I will call the migration as configure default identity tables. This will build the project. Once the build is successful, it will create migration. Perfect, you can see it is adding all of the tables that are needed. Let's run the migration with the command update database. Let's go to our SQL Server and see we have the identity server here, expand that and tables. Perfect, we have quite a few tables that are created here. That being said, let me minimize this and run the application. And great, as soon as we run the application, you can see it is displaying Welcome to Dundee Identity Server. Here you can find few of the links, but you can see our identity server is up and running. So that is great news. Let's continue in the next video.